Good evening and welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News, where we discuss the important events that would have taken place in our country over the last week or so. I want to take this opportunity to welcome our Facebook viewers and followers who have been faithfully looking at this program over the past several months from right across Guyana and of course also in several parts of North America, Europe and elsewhere. I hope that you had an enjoyable weekend, an enjoyable Easter. As you know, many kites did not go up. The weather was not good. It's in my view, one of the worst Easters we have had in recent memory. Many of the kites that the children had on the seawall, in the pastures at 63 Beach, they did not go up. Breeze was not blowing, and then rain fell for most of the day. Many people say that it's because the government shared out some kites. It's the first time they have ever engaged in that kind of kite sharing activities, and people say maybe that's why. But you would have seen the president used an helicopter and flew around the country distributing kites. A conservative estimate was done in terms of the cost of the kites, and it came up to several $million in kites that the government distributed, and another several $1 million would have been utilized by the government using an helicopter to transport the president from Corriverton to Albion to Bad Settlement and various other parts of the country. You would recognize that there were advance parties on the ground at every location, several vehicles. Children were bussed in from all over the place and taken to a central spot where the helicopter landed and the president shared out the kites. So I don't have an idea how much the total cost would have been to taxpayers, but it would have run into millions of dollars. An helicopter is not a cheap way of transportation by any means. And when one would have taken into account the other number of vehicles and the other logistics that would have been employed to transport the children, along with the cost of the kites, it would have run into millions of taxpayers' dollars. And the question is that a prudent expenditure of taxpayers' money? Is it prudent for a poor country like Guyana, where you have thousands of sugar workers who can't get a job, whose families are on the breadline, thousands of public servants who have been dismissed, thousands of those who have been laid off in the private sector? They can't earn a livelihood, they can't support their family, but the government takes millions of dollars and distributes kites using an helicopter to fly around the country. You just think about it and assess for yourself whether that is a prudent way to spend what obviously is scarce financial resources. But that is the kind of government that we have, that is the mentality of the government that we have running the country. So these are things that we have to continue to expect, though it may appear bizarre to the ordinary and reasonable minded citizens. I want to begin tonight's program by thanking the thousands of persons who turned up to witness the cricket match in commemoration of Dr. Chenny Jagan's 100th birth anniversary right here in Berbice. Last Saturday, I understand 5,000 persons or more were in the ground to view the cricket match. That was a tremendous response, and we thank you very much for your massive support. I could not have been there, unfortunately, because I was distributing kites in Georgetown and on villages on the east coast of Demerara, as well as in west coast Berbice, and I did that not using taxpayers' dollars. I did that at my own expenses and based upon generous donations I would have received from certain business entities in Georgetown and around the country. So I did not spend public funds to share the thousands of kites which I distributed to communities in several parts of Region 4. So I could not have been there, and I'm sorry for that. But the leader of the opposition and many other party leaders were present and were warmly embraced and greeted by so many thousands of you here in Berbice. So we thank you very much for that massive show of support. I must also tell you that while I was distributing the kites in West Coast Berbice, arranged by some kind folks from number 40 village and Seafield village on the west coast of Berbice, there were several attempts to stop me from distributing those kites. You know, those areas that we chose to distribute the kites in West Coast Berbice are traditional PNC areas. The people there are normally supportive of the PNC. So when they heard that Anil Nandlal was coming to distribute the kites, they denied us permission from using a primary school that we were planning to share the kites from. They also stopped us from using a tarmac, a public facility. The NDC wrote the organizers of the program late the night before and informed them that they will not be granted permission to use that tarmac, simply for me to stand there and distribute the kites. As a result, we had to use the premises of a kind and generous person in the area, and that is where we were able to distribute the kites. And these were kites simply to be distributed to children who most of them may not have been able to afford kites, and this was a gesture of charity to help the children and to make their Easter a happy one. But many persons within the government and supporters of the government attempted to stop me from distributing the kites, but we overcame those hurdles, and we eventually succeeded in distributing several hundred kites along the west coast of Berbice, and I want to thank those persons who helped me to organize and bring those children, and I want to thank the parents of those children for allowing them to come to receive the kites. I know the pressure that those people are under, but we will continue to do this. I promise the children and I promise the people of West Coast Berbice that this will be an annual event and that I will be distributing kites next year as well, and we are going to do it in a bigger way. So the ExxonMobil contract continues to generate tremendous interest in our country, and justifiably so, because it is the most important contract ever entered into by Guyana. It is a contract that has the potential to transform our country. The oil and gas sector is poised to take us to a trajectory that we would all aspire to, but many feel, and with justification, that the situation is being handled in a horrible way by the government, beginning with the contract that they have signed. And you know, every time they try to defend the contract, they put themselves in even greater embarrassment. They have taken a position that they are refusing to renegotiate the contract. That is what the President has said. The Minister of Business has said so, and the Minister of Natural Resources have said so. But ever so often, you hear them trying to defend the indefensible. So we are not sure anymore who is responsible for the oil and gas sector. There was a public announcement 2 weeks ago, which indicated that oil and gas sector was being removed from the Ministry of Natural Resources, from the ministerial portfolio of Minister Trotman, and was handed over to the Ministry of the Presidency and assigned specifically to Minister Harman. But you would have seen over the weekend that Minister Trotman continues to speak on the oil and gas sector. So my question is, who is really responsible for this sector? Is it Minister Trotman? Is it the Ministry of the Presidency? Is it Natural Resources? Or is it Mr. Joe Harman? We need some clarification on this matter, because ministerial portfolios are assigned to ministers and public announcements are made so that the populace out there can hold the minister responsible for matters pertaining to that sector. That is how responsible government operates. This weekend, Minister Trotman says that the government can visit the oil operations of ExxonMobil and its affiliate companies at any time. And that is not so, because the contract says that the government is obliged to serve on the contractor, which is the oil company, 1 week's notice, 7 days notice. So, and that is very clearly stated in the contract. How can Mr. Trotman mislead the public by contending that the government can visit the contractor operations at any time? He calls it an impromptu visit. It cannot happen. It cannot happen. The contract doesn't permit it. The contract mandates the minister or those assigned by the minister to serve upon the oil company 7 days notice before any such visit can be made. And when the visits are made, even at that stage, there are certain things that a minister cannot do. He cannot request certain type of information. He cannot request certain type of data. Minister Trotman, in the same statement over the weekend, said that GRA can also go there at any time. Again, that is not true. First of all, the operations, the oil operations are exempt from taxes. No part of the operations, that is what is going on out there where the rig is taxable. It is not taxable. They have exempted it from capital gains tax. They have exempted it from corporation tax. They have exempted it from VAT. They have exempted it from every tax. So what business would GRA have going out there in the rig? So that was another inaccurate statement peddled by Minister Raphael Trotman. And I responded. And I pointed out exactly what I've said here, that no government can do impromptu visits, that they must comply with the 7-day notice period, and that GRA has no business visiting. GRA would be trespassing because the activities that are being carried out there are not taxable. GRA can only go where there is some tax issues, and the oil operations are exempt from taxes. And I also advised in my response that the least the government says on this matter is better. Because it's a horrible contract that they negotiated, and in their attempt to defend what is indefensible, they are only embarrassing themselves further. That advice was not heeded, and just today they issued another statement, which I have replied to. Now they are saying in this statement issued today that the contract signed under the PPP had the same 7 days clause. In other words, the contract had the identical clause which says that you cannot visit unless you serve 7 days notice. Well, I was not objecting to the clause. I was objecting to Trotman saying, in the face of that clause, that you can go and visit at any time. That is what my objection was, in principle. The gravamen of it was that you cannot go unless you serve the notice. Of course, unless you decide you intend to breach the contract, so you toss aside the requirement of a 7 days notice, if that is what Minister Trotman meant, but I don't think he meant that. So they said that I, as Attorney General, saw the clause in all the contracts that the PPP signed and never objected to it. What they don't understand, or what they refuse to recognize in their incompetence, I must say, is that the PPP negotiated contracts with oil companies who were prospecting. They were engaged in exploratory work. We didn't find billions of barrels of oil within Guyana's territorial space. So the contracts negotiated under the PPP are radically different contracts. We didn't have oil. And if an explorer is coming or a prospector is coming, normally prospecting contracts by their very nature are always generous in favor of the prospector, because that is the person or the entity that would be investing and spending all the money up front without knowing whether they would find any oil or any resources for which they are prospecting. It is the same principle that governs prospecting licenses in the gold and diamond industry. You gave them general liberal terms in their favor because they are expending all the money, they are taking all the risks, they don't know whether they are coming up with anything at the end of the process, and all their money can possibly be wasted. So to compare those contracts with the ExxonMobil contracts is comparing chalk with cheese. When this government signed the 2016 ExxonMobil contract, it was already found that we had huge amount of oil in commercial quantities. Obviously, having discovered that would significantly impact the kind of contract you will now enter into. You're not going to rent a land that is barren at the same price that you're going to rent land that is fertile. You have to be a madman to treat both at the same level. So this government is equating the contract signed under the PPP with that signed by them. When we signed those contracts, we didn't know that we had any amount of oil in commercial quantities. They know, and yet they signed a contract almost identical to the one we signed when we had no oil. And that point can't get into these people's brain. Obviously, if you have 10 million or how many million barrels of oil, you're not going to sign the same contract as if you had zero oil. That is common sense. So today in their statement, they bring up that whole thing again that I, as Attorney General, advised the government then to sign these contracts with a 7-day notice. Yes, I may have done so, but we had no oil, so it did not matter. There was no need for us to go and inspect anything because there were no oil there. But once the oil is found and the production agreement is to be executed, then clearly you are dealing with a different kettle of fish. And you now have to move away from the exploratory license and exploratory terms or the terms of the exploratory contract and negotiate a contract now that is in your best interest because you own the resources. And these people can't get this thing right. So you will read tomorrow in the newspapers a very twisted statement by the Ministry of Natural Resources, as I said, who continue to speak on a matter over which it has no ministerial portfolio. I don't know how that is happening because they have removed it from them, but they continue to, and calling me hypocritical and all sorts of things. But that's okay. And then throws in this an analogy by comparing contracts that we had executed with contracts that they have executed and saying that it is the same thing. How can it be the same thing when one time we had zero oil and when you signed the contract you had how many million barrels of oil? How can it ever be the same thing? But even so, so that is the kind of government that we are dealing with. And that is why so many people are worried that Guyana may not benefit from the oil. That is why. Today the statement that the ministry has issued demonstrates and illustrates clearly that basic things are not being understood. Elementary matters cannot be comprehended. How can the complex matters be understood and comprehended? How can it happen? And that is why people are saying that they don't trust this government. The corruption is unbelievable. The corruption which permeates this government is unbelievable. The incompetence is unparalleled. Just look at any sector and you choose, and you will see any sector, you choose across the board, whichever ministerial minister you want to look at, and you will see how pronounced the level of incompetence is. So people are genuinely worried that though we have this great abundance of resources, and though we have this great abundance of oil resources and oil reserves, Guyana may not benefit because of the level of incompetence which permeates the government that is in office. If they can't understand, comprehend, internalize, assimilate, and digest simple elementary issues of the type that I have mentioned, how can they negotiate and understand complex matters? And that is what the worry is. And that is why so many people are complaining. So many people are critical of them. People who supported them. Christopher Ram and Angul Saran. These people are not PPP people. Kaichor News certainly is not a PPP newspaper. But why so many people are speaking out? Because they are genuinely worried that this government is out of its depth when it comes to many, many matters, but certainly the oil sector. This government has yet to unfold a plan that prepares the economy for oil. Nothing. You're not hearing any long-term plan to prepare us, because at some point in time we are going to get oil cheap. And what are we going to do with the oil? You're not hearing expansions or plans to move the agro sector because of the oil. The thing that is holding back this country's potential is the cost of power. The cost of power, of energy in this country is exorbitant. Exorbitant. When compared with our neighbors, we are 5-6 times higher than Trinidad. We are 5-6 times higher in relation to energy than the United States of America. At some point in time, we are going to get oil cheap. Guyana will benefit from that. That's not disputed. We are going to get a percentage of the oil at a very cheap price. And that will happen shortly when production begins. What is the government planning to do to, rather than just use the oil up or sell it out? What is it going to do to make use of the oil in other ways, in terms of developing other sectors? For example, how cheap oil can impact upon the agriculture sector. What we need is to build factories. The reason why we can't build factories here is because of the cost of electricity. We are now going to get cheap oil, so electricity costs are going down. Therefore, the government should have a plan on how oil will impact on the agri sector and the manufacturing sector, in other areas, in other value added production lines, for example forestry and even bauxite. But you're hearing nothing from the government, absolutely nothing. It is as if they plan to just get the oil, use what we can use, and then sell the rest. That is not the best use. And then after that, our economy will become solely dependent upon oil. We have already learned that the oil is not going to employ people, a lot of people in Guyana. It is not going to be an employer, because nobody has indicated yet that they will be refining oil here. So the jobs are going to be, they are highly mechanized for production, and it is out there 120 miles from here. And the ExxonMobil have their own people that they're employing. Minimal local employment will come from the industry. That is why the oil has to be used to empower other industries to employ people. But there's no plan from this government. None at all. You have something that is big in the oil industry called local content. For example, in Trinidad, you have local content legislation which mandates oil companies not to own properties, or rather prohibit oil companies from owning properties in Trinidad. So they have to rent. There are certain things, there are certain aspects of the oil operations in Trinidad that foreigners cannot get employment for. Only local people can get it. We have none of that in Guyana. And the government, they keep talking about it, and nothing is being done about it. Nothing is being done. You hear them talking about local content all the time. But there is not even a draft bill yet. The thing has to be made into law. It has to be made into law. And you're not seeing anything coming from the government. So I say all of that so that you can understand why so many people are worried that we may gain very little from the vast amount of oil that is out there. And there are countries to which we can point that has the same potential like us, same oil like us, but the people remain dirt poor. We don't have to go far. Venezuela has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. certainly the largest in this half of the world. And where is Venezuela now? People are starving in Venezuela. People are leaving Venezuela by the thousands per day simply because they can't get a meal in that country. They are living on the streets. They are migrating to other territories by the droves per day. And that is the richest country in oil in the Western Hemisphere. So we don't have to look very far for an example where oil can mean nothing if it is not properly managed. And that's the problem here. I now want to move over to the sugar industry because there has been some development over the last week or so. You would have read in the news that the government, rather the Special Purposes Unit and NISIL, have secured a $30 billion loan which they intend to inject into the sugar industry. 30 billion. Now let me say from the outset that I am not opposed to a loan, neither am I opposed to financial injection or investments in the sugar industry. The industry needs that, and we have been saying that it needs that. But where is the plan? Where is the plan? What are we following? What program are we following? What use will be made of this $30 billion? We don't know. We do not know. Now, you would recall that this is the very government that told us that sugar is a waste of time, that investing in sugar is pouring money down a black hole, that sugar is a drain to the treasury, that the sugar industry is not feasible. All these things we have been told by this very government. And all of a sudden somebody wakes up and announces, the same government, that $30 billion will be put into the industry. How suddenly this industry that was not feasible, not profitable, was a drain on the treasury, suddenly you are putting $30 billion in this same industry? I mean, is this government serious or is it just guessing? The government said that from 2015 to 2017, it put in the form of subsidy 32 billion Guyana dollars into the industry. Where did that money go? Because you still end up closing the estates. You still end up sending home how many? 7 or 8,000 workers. So what did you do with the 32 billion? Did you put the 32 billion in the first place into the industry? Or is it a lie? And if you have put it in the industry, how come you still had to end up closing the estates and you still had to end up sending home all the sugar workers? So where did the money go? We are not getting answers to these questions. And the government continues not to follow any form, any plan. They're refusing to do a feasibility study. They're refusing to do projections. All scientific methods they are running away from. So we already put 32 billion. We end up closing the 4 or 5 estates, sending home all the thousands of sugar workers after we already spent 32 billion. So why did you spend the money? What did you get for the money? You got nothing from the money because you end up closing the place down anyhow. So we lost 32 billion, or it was stolen. And that is the level of corruption that I'm speaking about. Was it stolen? Because I can't imagine where $32 billion gone. And you still had to end up closing the estates and sending home everybody. Now you're putting another 30 billion and you still don't have a plan. You still don't have a projection. Persons who are listening to me and who may have experience with the banks, you would know that if you go to the bank and you borrow a loan, you have to provide the bank with a projection of what you plan to do with this money and how you intend to repay. This Gaisuku doesn't have a projection. It doesn't have a plan. So what will it do with the 30 billion? Based upon a news report, it says that it's going to rebuild infrastructure. This is the kind of generic term or terms that are being used. Rebuild infrastructure at the estate. $30 billion. $30 billion. Had they put that really in the industry, into the industry as subsidies, not a single sugar worker would have had to have been sent home. And that 30 billion would have kept the industry for about 4 years at the level of the subsidy that we were subsidizing it. You had 30 billion is 4 years of subsidy and not a single job would have been lost. They send home everybody, knock off everybody and still spending 30 billion and not re-employing, because we haven't heard anything about re-employing them yet. And they have borrowed the 30 billion from commercial banks, not from international financial institutions or from a country. They have borrowed it from local commercial banks. It means that they are paying high commercial rates. And this is not a concessionary loan. So how is this money going to be repaid? Where is the plan to show how the money is going to be spent, how it's going to be repaid, and what will it yield, short term and long term? Nothing. So we feel that this money is going to be stolen too. Because 30 billion will be dropped in a hole, and then you hear Gaisuku still closing down. And they have already put 32 billion. And the other important thing is that they have put as collateral for this loan of 30 billion all the assets of Gaisuku. So if this loan cannot be repaid, then all the lands, millions of hectares of land, plant and machinery will now be owned by the banks. And when we get back into government, we may not be able to bring back the industry because we wouldn't have the assets. The assets would have been gone to commercial banks, where it will be sold off when the loan cannot be paid. And we are not getting sensible answers no matter what we say to this government. We're not getting sensible answers. We are prepared in the opposition to work with the government for the long-term future of the industry. But we want to see transparency. We want a plan. We want to see a projection. We want to see how is it you're going to make the industry profitable. We are not going to do guesswork. We are not going to operate at the whim and fancy of a few people. So $32 billion and a sugar worker is not going to get a job. So that is one plan. Then there is another plan that they have. They have advertised in the newspapers inviting expression of interest for private cane farmers to harvest to plant and harvest cane at Enmore, Rose Hall, and Skeldon. That's all that the advertisement says. So a few private cane farmers went in to make inquiry to get some more information. And they are told that they will be given the land by Gaisuku to plant. That's the first thing. Secondly, they will be paid a flat rate per ton. Never mind how far the field is from the factory. Never mind what state the field is in. Gaisuku not preparing the field for planting. The farmers have to go and do that. Notwithstanding whatever yield you may get, all those things aside, you're still getting one flat rate per ton. So if your cane field is close to the factory, or it is 20 miles away from the factory, so you have to incur the transportation cost of bringing the cane to the factory is the same rate you're getting. If you get a good field, in terms of when you go there to start a plant, to prepare the field for planting, for cultivation, if you get a bad field or you get a good field, you're paying the same flat rate per ton. They will pay you. Secondly, the cane farmer is responsible for the hiring of all employees. All taxes, NIS payments, transportation to and from work, all other amenities, water, whatever it is, medical benefits, everything has to be provided for by the cane farmer. Which cane farmer has that capacity in Guyana? None of the incentive schemes to which the workers were entitled to under Gaisuku will be available, because no cane farmer can afford that. So all the API and the disturbance allowance and the overtime, etc., that will be gone. So the sugar worker now will work far less than he was working with Gaisuku. Far less. Then thirdly, they said that they will not tolerate any unions. That the cane farmers, when they employ these workers, they must tell the workers that they can't belong to a union. The right of a worker to join a union is guaranteed by the Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. It is a fundamental right and freedom. It is a human right. Just because you have a right to speak, and you have a right to move, and you have a right to liberty, and you have a right to a fair trial, you have a right to form and associate with a union of your choice. And that right was not won easily. People died. Hundreds of people died. People went to jail. The sugar workers struggled under the leadership of Chenny Jagan for decades before their union GAU was allowed to represent them. They had to hold strikes after strikes. Some of the longest strikes ever held in this part of the world were held by the sugar workers in Guyana for GAU to be recognized as their union. And today, this government wants to deny those workers their right to be part of their union and to be represented by their union. They want to exploit these workers, deny them their basic human rights as workers. We have signed on to ILO conventions, and we have passed other laws. For example, the Trade Union Recognition Act that allows a union, a worker, a right to a union, and a union a right to represent, for the workers to choose their own union, because they are competing unions. We have put all of that in our laws. And in the year 2018, when we are supposed to be advancing workers' rights and industrial relations, etc., we are retrograding. We are moving backwards. Instead of capitalizing on the gains that we have made in industrial and labor relations, we are now retrograding. We are going backwards. And this government is putting workers through that. Imagine denying workers a right to a union in the year 2018. So, I have spoken for a while and I have dealt with a number of issues. I will now go to the phone where I will invite your comments. Please be brief and please be respectful. You can disagree with me, but you don't have to be disrespectful. Thank you. Caller, you're on the air. Good night. Thank you. That's it? That caller just called to wish me happy Easter. So, I hope when you call in, be prepared to offer your comments on the issues that I have been speaking about. Caller, you're on the air. Hello? Please, when you call, make sure that you lower the volume of your television because I get a feedback into the studio and I will not be able to hear what you say and I'll be forced to cut you off as I had to do with that caller just now. Hi, good night. How are you? Well, yes, go ahead. Yes.
So will you come along talk with them people that hopefully becoming landlord? They don't put that on to down full of pocket.
All right, caller. Thank you. So the caller is making the point that they are not interested in the long-term future of the sugar industry, but are more interested in the short term. Caller, you're on the air. I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. So I want to ask you a question. In the last election, right?
Yes.
You all said that it wasn't free and fair, but the vote for electoral position.
I didn't hear you.
But the last election you said it was fraud.
Yes.
And you have you said you're doing an election position.
Yes.
So we have more of it left. It's better under the carpet. I don't know if that's true.
All right. I'll brief. Good point.
The third election is coming.
Uh-huh.
I'm saying that if you have that problem again and you lose this election, what would be your next move?
All right, caller. Thank you. This caller has raised some important points. Let me begin by first dealing with the caller that spoke about the president sharing kites with his photograph on it. Well, you know, there was a time in this country when you had Forbes Burnham photographs on exercise books and on all kinds of pictures all over the place with his photographs. Well, we are getting back to that. Buildings are being painted green. The buses that the president, that the government is using to transport school children, they all have the president face on them. Now we have kites with the president face. It's a type of political ideology that comes from a dictatorial philosophy. Caller, you're on the air. Yes. The who? The harvesters who are working with Gaisuku? No, I'm not sure. Nobody wants to, thank you, caller. Nobody wants to enter into the arrangement with Gaisuku that I spoke about because it's not profitable. It's not profitable. And no one has the capital to invest in an event. You're speaking about hundreds of millions of dollars. You have to get trucks to transport the workers. You have to pay the NIS benefits, the medical insurance benefits. You're going to get one flat rate. Nobody is going to help you prepare the fields. You have to do everything yourself. Who has that kind of money in this country? Caller, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you guys before.
Yes.
You know, if we keep a medical, you know, the year 26 September month. You hear me?
I'm hearing you.
Yes. I mean, I get no response up to no from it. So why you put you from it, to give me away 27 up to no, I got nothing. You put it behind me and some clinical, you don't collect it, and check.
Could you raise it with your union? You have a union rep in your area? Yeah, well, could you follow it up with that, please? All right, I want to briefly take 2 minutes to explain that the elections petition which we filed challenging the 2015 elections is still in the court system. The GCOM had filed a summons trying to strike the petition out, and we had arguments, and the judge dismissed their summons seeking to strike out. They have since appealed to the full court, appealing that decision to strike out their summons. That appeal was heard, and we are waiting a decision. When that decision comes out, perhaps the election petition will start, or GCOM, if they lose, they may appeal again. Imagine GCOM does not want the elections petition to be heard. That is the ridiculous situation that we are faced with. In fact, next week I will spend about half of an hour on the program explaining what is happening with elections petition. So stay tuned next week. Yes, caller, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yeah, we get a problem with the NIS. I guess it's the DC money.
Uh-huh.
They give me no payment up to now.
You went into the NIS office?
Yeah, I got an accident.
Yes, the doctor certified that you were...
Yes, and I guess
This,
40% disability like that.
right, and you submitted your claim.
No payment. 9 months now.
So your claim has been submitted?
No, nothing.
But how do you expect payment if you have not applied for it?
I applied, they sent it back to doctor, so I'm giving you no payment up to now.
Yeah, they send you back to the doctor give you the disability 40%,
Yes.
and you not give them the paper, the doctor paper?
But we give them, they don't want to give nothing like that. Because I'm saying, whatever they say, but that they, like a problem they had with the NIS.
Where you live?
River Pirate.
Alright, could you know Zulfikar Mustafa?
Yes.
He meets people Saturday morning at New Amsterdam Freedom House.
Okay.
Could you call there and make an appointment to see him?
Yes.
And walk with your NIS documents.
Yes.
In particular, your NIS ID number. Alright?
Yes.
And we will see how we can assist you.
All right.
We have come to the end of the program. I want to thank you very much. We have discussed a lot of important issues. I want to thank you very much for being with me over the last hour or so. And I wish you all the best until I see you next week. Please take care and be happy. Thank you.